Hi, welcome to Let's Paint Minis. Today we're painting this little piggy. We're going to be looking at the easiest techniques to pick up and learn, so this is a great video for any beginners out there. The plan is to paint this half and half. One way I'm going to do as easy as possible, the other I might go a bit more complicated, and we'll be able to compare them at the end. So we're going to start with the base coat. I'm not priming this miniature, I'm going to try again without any prime. I find that it's a much slipperier surface for the first layer I have to put down, and almost always have to do a second base coat if I'm not priming. We're base coating with Bugman's Glow. And as I say, I'm going to use somewhat thinned down paints, do 2 layers to get a nice smooth finish over the entire mini. Once you have your base coat down, you could start with highlights or start with shades. I tend to start with the shades as I'm going to use washes, and that will adjust or change the colour on the miniature. That means we can use the base colour for what would technically be a highlight at that point. So it just means your colour choices and selections become a bit less and therefore a bit easier. I'm putting together my own wash here because I've got some inks and I want to have some fun playing around with them. Because we're just going for a red-brown mix, you could use something like Agrax Earthshade and Reichland Flesh Shade. That would do about the same sort of job. I would probably thin it down a bit more though, especially if you have some glaze medium, that would be great. A way of applying a wash is you can slap it all over the miniature. It will darken everything, but the paint being so wet will mostly sit and pool in the recesses of the miniature. Also, because of gravity, it tends to sink down to the bottom. So it will give you shadows in the lower parts and in the creases, which is exactly what we want. Obviously, doing it this way we have a bit less control as to where the shadows go, but we do have an element of control. Once you have the wash on the miniature, you can start moving it around. This is why I put the glaze medium in, because if the paint starts to dry and you are moving it around, you will tear it. You'll be pulling paint off of the miniature. But here I have plenty of time to move around the paint. I'm trying to push it all down to the bottom of the miniature and into the creases. Wherever you pull the paintbrush off of the mini, it tends to leave the most amount of paint in that area, so consider that when you're painting. Most of my brush strokes are going from top to bottom. When I'm painting in the crevices, because of the gravity, sometimes I'm painting from bottom to top. That will leave the pool of paint at the top of the crease, which will slowly, with gravity, roll down, making sure that all of that crease stays shaded. You want to make sure it's completely dry, which may take a little while because of the recipe that we used, but make sure it's completely dry before you do anything else, as you don't want to be pulling any paint off of the miniature and ruining it. We could continue and do more layers of this, but I'm trying to keep it simple, so we're going to add a bit of black ink. And then we're just going to put this wash over the bottom half of the miniature. Because the paint's so transparent, we shouldn't get a line between where we have and haven't painted this second layer. But you can wash the brush out and do a bit of feathering if you are nervous. I'm cleaning and wiping or quickly drying the brush and then coming back to the miniature and soaking up any pools or excess paint that I don't want on the mini. Again, I'm concentrating on getting the paint to the parts where shadows would be, so generally that's underneath, so under this big old belly and in the creases and things like that. Once it's dry, I do a second layer. I'm only painting the very bottom now, maybe the bottom quarter of the miniature, just to increase the contrast as much as possible. And this is the difference that we've made. So one side of this is still just the base tone, and we have the side where we've applied the washes. Because there's a gradient of shadow, it actually gives the illusion of a gradient of highlights as well. So there's a fairly big difference in contrast. A downside to the washes is this kind of muddy look that we have, which for a pig is absolutely fine. And if you're painting villagers or ruffians, again, it would be great. But if you want a nice clean look for your hero or something, it's not necessarily the best technique to use. Now it's time to start with highlighting. Because the color has been adjusted, I'm just re-establishing Bugman's glow. As I said before, this could be considered our first highlight, but it's the base tone. It makes the paint selection much easier as you don't have to select as many paints. The technique of dry brushing is to get paint onto a flat brush and wipe most of that paint off. We'll be left with dry flakes of pigment, and you can brush that over. That will only capture the raised parts of the miniature. It won't go into the recesses, so it's the opposite of a wash, and this will give us our highlights. It is great for any harsh contours. It's not so good for flat parts, like on the back of this pig, which we will see later. I've got this to the point where you have to do a couple of strokes for any paint to be visible, and so it takes quite a bit of work or time. There's a lot of strokes that go into it, but it's very easy. There's nothing too complicated about it. Again, the direction of these strokes will make a great difference, so consider where the contours are and brush against those. I also want the top of the pig to be brighter, so I'm generally painting from top to bottom. But when it comes to things like the ears and the face, I may change the direction based on where the wrinkles and creases are. As you can see, once we've got this down, it cleans up the miniature an awful lot. Our first additional color is going to be Cadian Flesh Tone, and again, we are brushing as much of that off of the brush as possible, and just as before, we're generally going top to bottom. We're doing this very softly, so I'm holding the end of the brush just so there's less resistance against the miniature. I'm pushing the contrast further here using some Vallejo basic skin tone. I realise now that it's such a big difference between the other tone that we used. I really should have just mixed the two together. Again, I'm going very gentle. I've got it to the point here where it takes maybe 5 or 6 brush strokes on my hand before I start seeing anything. This being the last highlight should be a very subtle change. And that's it. It really is that easy. It's very quick and easy process. It's very easy technique to pick up, and it can make a big difference. If you are new to miniature painting, this is the sort of thing that will hopefully give you that optimism and that sight that you can do this and you can get good results. Here you can see a lot of texture on the back. As I say, dry brushing isn't great for flat surfaces, but again, that texture isn't necessarily a bad thing. A pig's skin would be all ruffled and textured, so it can make sense in your world. It's actually a very dynamic and a fairly high contrast miniature, and as I say, you could push this as much as you wanted to. So you could do more layers of wash and go darker and darker. You could do a more gradual dry brush highlight. You can take this as far as you want, but I have just done 2 of each, and this is the result that we've been able to get. There will be another video where we paint the other half of the pig, probably using layers and glazes. So stay tuned for that if you want to see that. Thank you very much for watching the video. Do any of the things that people ask you to do, comment, like, and dare I say subscribe. There'll be many more videos like this as I go through my learning process and give you examples of what I have learned along the way. Until next time, bye.